You sacrifice 5 years of your life for someone. You give up your dreams, your career, your friends, everything, all to support their vision. You work 3 jobs while they chase their passion project. You pay for everything while they promise you'll be rich together someday. And then you find out it was all a lie. Every promise, every plan, every I love you. Complete fiction. Sometimes karma needs a little help, and sometimes that help comes wearing designer heels and carrying a laptop full of very, very damaging secrets. Meet Jake, 6'2", charming smile, talks a big game about being an entrepreneur, the kind of guy who orders expensive wine on dates and somehow makes you feel special for paying the bill. And meet Sarah, a 23-year-old, fresh out of college with a marketing degree, stupid enough to believe in love, and even stupider to believe in Jake's business dreams. They met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. Classic meet cute, right? He spills coffee on her laptop, offers to buy her a new one, and suddenly they're talking for 3 hours about his revolutionary app idea that's going to change everything. The app was called Connect Local. Basically, Yelp meets social media, meets online dating, but done right this time. Jake had the whole pitch memorized, complete with market research and projected revenue streams. He was so passionate, so confident, so absolutely certain that they'd be millionaires within 2 years. Sarah was hooked, not just on the app, but on him. He made her feel like she was part of something bigger, something important. They were going to build an empire together. God, she was such an idiot. They moved in together after 6 months. Jake was working on the app full-time, which meant coding for about 4 hours a day and playing video games for the other 8. Meanwhile, Sarah was working at a marketing firm during the day, bartending 3 nights a week, and doing freelance social media management on weekends. But it was okay, right? Because they were building something together. Jake showed her mock-ups, told her about meetings with investors that never seemed to happen, explained how her marketing background would be crucial when they launched. "Just give me 2 years, babe," he said, kissing her forehead while she counted tip money at 2 a.m. 2 years, and we'll never have to worry about money again. 2 years became 3. 3 became 4. She was paying rent, utilities, groceries, everything. Jake occasionally picked up small freelance coding gigs, but most of that money went toward business expenses, which apparently included a lot of craft beer and expensive computer equipment. But he kept showing progress. New features, beta testing, almost signed investor deals. Always, always, always just around the corner. Meanwhile, Sarah was getting promoted at her day job, building a real career, making actual money. But Jake convinced her not to take a position that required travel because the app is so close to launching, I need you here. So she turned down opportunities, worked herself to death to support his dream. She watched her college friends advance their careers while she stayed stuck in Portland funding a fantasy. By year 4, something started feeling off. Jake's investor meetings always seemed to happen when Sarah was at work, but he never had any real details afterward. The app looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago, and he was getting new expensive stuff but claimed it was borrowed from friends. One night, she noticed Jake had a brand new MacBook Pro, the $4,000 model. "Where'd this come from?" she asked. "Oh, my buddy Marcus lent it to me for development work," he said without looking up. But the next morning, Sarah saw the receipt in the trash, purchased with a credit card she'd never seen before. When she asked about it, Jake got defensive and angry. "Why are you going through my stuff? Don't you trust me? I'm working my ass off for our future." Their future, right. The future she was funding with 3 jobs while he bought mystery electronics. But she let it slide because she was invested now. 5 years invested. She couldn't just throw that away over some sketchy purchases, right? Wrong. So freaking wrong. A month later, Jake had to go to Seattle for a crucial investor presentation. Big break, could change everything, needed to focus completely. He'd be gone for 3 days. Perfect. Finally, some time for Sarah to dive deep into the app development and maybe surprise him with some marketing materials when he got back. She booted up his laptop, the expensive one she bought him for Christmas, and started looking through the Connect Local files. And that's when her world imploded. The app, it had been finished for over a year. Not just finished, it was live, making money with thousands of users. There was a fully functional business with real revenue, real customers, and real success. But her name wasn't anywhere on it. The company was registered solely to Jake Sullivan. The bank accounts were in his name only. The investor meetings she'd been funding with bartending tips, they actually happened. And Jake had closed a $2.3 million Series A funding round 8 months earlier. Sarah had been working 3 jobs to support a millionaire who had been lying to her face for over a year. But wait, it got worse. She found business documents showing Jake had been living a double life. He had a luxury apartment in Seattle, a Tesla, expensive watches, all purchased with investor money while claiming to be broke. The company had 12 full-time employees, including a head of marketing named David Chen. David Chen, her own brother, who she hadn't spoken to in 3 years after a family fight. Jake had hired her estranged brother and never told her. Her brother was getting paid $120,000 a year to do the job Jake had promised her, and neither of them thought to mention this little detail. That was her 5 years, her work, her sacrifice, her freaking life, and her own family was in on it. So Jake thought he could just erase Sarah from the story, make her disappear while he played entrepreneur with his Seattle side piece? She spent the entire weekend going through everything: bank statements, business documents, email chains, investor presentations, all of it. And she found something beautiful. Jake had been committing massive fraud. When pitching to investors, he had inflated user numbers by creating thousands of fake accounts. He claimed partnerships with local businesses that didn't exist. He even faked testimonials and reviews. The Series A funding was based on completely fraudulent data. But here was the really beautiful part. She had proof of everything. 5 years of living with someone meant you saw all their dirty laundry, and Jake's laundry could bury him. Email chains where he admitted to faking user data, screenshots of him creating fake business partnerships, recorded phone calls where he laughed about scamming investors with inflated metrics. Jake Sullivan was about to learn that karma is a bitch, and she'd been taking notes for 5 years. Jake came back from Seattle with gifts, cheap jewelry, and a story about how the investor meeting went really well, but they needed more time to decide. Same bullshit he'd been feeding Sarah for years. But now, she knew about David, her brother, working for Jake, getting paid 6 figures while she worked 3 jobs. Actually, she said, I think I should call David and let him know how you've been struggling. Maybe he can help with some marketing connections. Jake's face went sheet white. David? Why would you call David? You guys don't even talk. Exactly, but family should stick together during tough times, right? I'm sure he'd love to help your startup succeed. The panic in Jake's eyes was beautiful. He started stammering about how he didn't want to burden her family, how he'd figure it out himself, how David probably couldn't help anyway. That's weird, she said, pulling out her phone, because according to LinkedIn, David specializes in app marketing, and he works for a company called Connect Local. Jake looked like he was about to throw up. Small world, huh? So the next Friday, Sarah flew to Seattle. Not to surprise Jake, to destroy him. She'd spent the week preparing, and she was about to turn his perfect little con artist life into a smoking crater. First stop, Connect Local's actual office, which was in a trendy building downtown. She walked in wearing her best business suit, carrying a briefcase, looking like she belonged there. "Hi, I'm Sarah Chen," she told the receptionist. "I'm here to see my brother David about a family matter." 5 minutes later, David appeared in the lobby, and the look on his face was pure shock. They hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since their dad's funeral when they had that massive fight about his gambling debts. "Sarah, what are you doing here? How did you know I worked here?" They sat in his office, and the guilt was eating him alive before she even said anything. "So, David, tell me about your boss, Jake Sullivan." David's face crumbled. "Oh, God, Sarah, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain how you've been working for my boyfriend for 8 months and never mentioned it? Can you explain how you're making $120,000 doing the job he promised me?" Turns out, Jake had approached David through LinkedIn, knowing exactly who he was. Jake told David that Sarah was unstable and struggling with addiction, and that contacting her would be damaging to her recovery process. Jake had manipulated her own brother into believing she was a drug addict who couldn't handle knowing about his success. But here's the beautiful part. David had access to everything: financial records, investor communications, internal company data. And he'd been feeling guilty about the Sarah situation for months. "He lied to me about you," David said, tears in his eyes. "But Sarah, he's also been lying to the investors. The user data is completely fabricated. We have maybe 30% of the users he claims, and half of those are fake accounts he created." Her brother had just handed her the keys to Jake's destruction. But Sarah wasn't done. David, now desperate to make things right, told her about the board meeting scheduled for Monday morning. All the investors would be there to discuss the Series B funding round. Perfect. Monday morning, she showed up at Connect Local's office in her best power suit, carrying a briefcase full of evidence. The receptionist tried to stop her, but David, now her ally, escorted her to the conference room. Jake walked in and saw her sitting at the table with his investors, and it looked like his soul left his body. "Sarah, what are you doing here? David, what the hell is this?" "Taking back my 5 years," she said calmly. She spent the next hour presenting everything: the real development timeline, showing that she funded and supported the entire project; the fraudulent data Jake used to secure investment; the fake user accounts and inflated metrics; audio recordings of Jake admitting to lying about the company's progress. But here's the kicker. She also revealed how Jake manipulated her family, how he deliberately hired her brother and told him she was a drug addict to keep them from communicating, how he'd been using their family dysfunction to cover his tracks. The investors were horrified. This wasn't just business fraud. It was psychological manipulation and securities fraud. David stood up and corroborated everything, providing internal documents that proved Jake's deception. Her brother, who Jake thought was his loyal employee, had just become his executioner. But wait, there was more. She also presented her intellectual property claim. It turns out, since she had contributed substantial creative input to Connect Local's development and could prove it with dated recordings and documents, she owned a significant portion of the company's IP. Jake tried to deny everything, but she had 5 years of evidence, and now David was backing her up with internal company records. The investors gave Jake 2 options: transfer majority ownership to her immediately or face federal prosecution for securities fraud. Guess which one he chose? Within 48 hours, she owned 60% of Connect Local. Jake got to keep 15% because she was feeling generous. The other 25% stayed with the investors, who were honestly just grateful she wasn't pressing charges. But she wasn't done destroying Jake's life. She fired him from his own company. Security escorted him out of the building, while his employees, who knew about his lies, watched and applauded. She promoted David to Chief Marketing Officer with a 40% raise and a public apology for how Jake had manipulated their family situation. She and her brother started rebuilding their relationship, bonding over the shared experience of being deceived by the same sociopath. She took over as CEO and immediately implemented every idea she'd suggested over the years that Jake had dismissed. Within 3 months, user engagement increased by 300% and revenue doubled. Forbes wrote an article about the hostile takeover that saved a startup. She was on the cover under the headline, "The Woman Who Stole Back Her Stolen Dreams." Jake tried to badmouth her on social media, but that backfired spectacularly when she released selected audio recordings of him admitting to fraud and calling their investors stupid rich idiots who'll believe anything. His reputation in the tech industry was completely destroyed. No one would work with him, invest in him, or even hire him. He had to move back in with his parents in Ohio. But here was the most beautiful part of all this revenge. 6 months after taking over Connect Local, she got a call from the FBI. Turns out, Jake's fraud was bigger than anyone realized. He'd been running similar cons on 3 other women in different cities, taking their money to fund his lifestyle while promising them all partnerships in various startups. The FBI wanted her to testify in their case against Jake for running a multi-state investment fraud scheme. She agreed immediately. Connect Local grew into a $50 million company under her leadership. David became her business partner, and they healed their family relationship. They'd even started a foundation that helped people who'd been victims of financial manipulation. They called it Second Chances, because sometimes you have to take back your time before you can move forward. Jake got sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, manipulation, and theft. The judge specifically mentioned how his psychological manipulation of family relationships to cover financial crimes made his case particularly heinous. At his sentencing, she sat in the front row. When they read his sentence, she mouthed, "Thank you," to him. Thank you for teaching her that she was stronger than she thought. Thank you for showing her that her loyalty was worth more than his lies. And thank you for being stupid enough to underestimate the woman who funded his entire life. 5 years. Jake stole 5 years of her life. But in taking them back, she didn't just recover that time, she multiplied it. Those 5 years of sacrifice and struggle taught her how to spot lies, fight for what she deserved, and build something real. They taught her that sometimes the person you're supporting isn't worth your loyalty, but the skills you develop while supporting them are invaluable. Jake thought he could erase her from the story and write her out of her own life. Instead, she erased him from his own company and wrote herself a much better ending. He wasted 5 years of her life, so she took back every second, plus interest, plus his business, plus his reputation, plus his future. And the best part? Every day she goes to work at the company she built, in the office she earned, with the woman she loves, she knows that somewhere in Ohio, Jake is probably still trying to figure out how the girl who paid his bills became the CEO who destroyed his life. Don't let anyone steal your time, and if they do, make sure you steal it back with interest. Time is the one thing you can never get back, unless you're smart enough, ruthless enough, and patient enough to take it from the person who stole it in the first place. If you've got a story like this, email me. No judgment, just receipts. And remember to subscribe for more relatable stories.